Jim, am I on? I am sitting on our living room couch, looking up at a patch of blue sky through a rectangle of skylight glass. A determined breeze sends the dead leaves of autumn somersaulting over its dome. Ray McCallum installed it soon after we moved in many years ago. Ray was handy with tools, had a knack for finish carpentry. The skylight remains watertight, but the openings on either end of the long ceiling-to-roof bay do not quite line up. For once, Ray's experienced eye had failed him, but only a little. It's a barely perceptible asymmetry, a slight distortion. Ray is dying on the hospice wing's third floor of a nursing home in town. His body, like his skylight, no longer lines up either. Age has distorted his torso, and disease has warped his organs. He has only days to live, maybe only hours. He knows that Barbara, his dead wife, reposes in a coffin at a funeral home down the road. I have just gotten back from there, from paying my respects to the grieving daughters. Ray is too far gone, too frail to join them, to greet the chattering mourners. Tomorrow is the funeral. He will miss that too. Ray is lying immobile in a low recliner. His carpenter's hands lie in limp repose on his robed lap. Tubed oxygen flows into his nose. His face is puffy, a mask, no longer able to show emotion. I move from where he can see me. He greets me by name. I kneel by his side, aligning our faces, the living and the dying, on a level playing field. He looks at me with old man's eyes overflowing with tears, the grimace of a smile on his dusky lips. We take turns mumbling words, mine of sorrow and comfort, his of impending death. He says that he too could go at any time now, what with his kidneys having failed him and all. I tell him I had learned that before she died, Barbara had been brought up to his room and they had been together for a few days. He nods and looks away, as if trying to recall those bittersweet moments. I place my folded hands on his limp and swollen ones, hands that had once gripped a hammer, fitted and sealed a skylight only on a slightly distorted bay. I do what one does when death stalks the child of God. I pray to a father whose son too had once died, but that death was short-lived. The risen one would soon welcome Ray to be with him too. Ray and Barbara together again. What that would be like, neither Ray nor I have much of an idea. I end my prayer and say goodbye. As I walk back to the car, I feel that I had been nearer to heaven than I'd ever been before, closer to the mystery of that which lay beyond death, of which no one knows very much at all. Having talked to a dying man who was moments away from crossing that inscrutable threshold, I am moved to tears. I have not seen the Lamb on his throne, but I had conversed with someone who was about to see for himself. The mystery remains, but the feeble comfort I had offered Ray gave me a comfort and assurance that all will be well with Barbara, with Ray, with me. Now, that has to do with Ray McLean and Blanche, which many of you who many of you had known in the past. I changed the names. This talk of mine is said to be a study of my remarkable life. But I have chosen to make it a study, rather, of another remarkable life, that of Jesus. So I hope you'll forgive me. I will read a bit of a memoir, however. When long life stretches like a red carpet on which I'd trod but half its length, I use numbers to mark its passage, 20 candles, 40 black balloons. In childhood, I tracked the years on pudgy fingers till there were enough for long pants and trainer wheels and a desk at school. 10 years became my goal, then 16, then 21 for license and status. Then I counted children and dollars and calories and years before retirement. The numbers have grown smaller as decades lived our 8 and grandparents 2, and each day is one after another until the last one here dissolves into eternity. This is what Frederick Buechner said about stories. He said, "My story is important not because it is mine, God knows, but because if I tell it anything like right, the chances are that you will recognize that in many ways it is also yours. It is precisely through these stories in all their peculiarity, as I have long believed and often said, that God makes himself known to each of us most powerfully and personally. If this is true, it means that to lose track of our stories is to be profoundly impoverished, and not only humanly, but also spiritually. My story on planet Earth, now this is not Buechner, this is me talking. My story on planet Earth began in 1939 on the first Wednesday in April. My arrival was preceded by 2 questions. One before conception and the other before birth. They were asked by my mother of her husband and of her doctor. These introductory questions were revealed to me by my mother one evening after I had taken her, a widow of 10 years, for yet another wet burrito at Sam's Joint in Alaska, Michigan. On the drive home, I wanted to know a little bit more about her upbringing, wondering how she had processed her coming of age. She grew up in the era of post-Victorian prudery and had to figure things out on her own. Now at 90, she'd had lots of time to think things over and had lost some of her embarrassment regarding the facts of life. There had been no honeymoon, she told me, but there was the nuptial bed. She had asked her new husband, "Lau, macht dit nou wel?" "Lou, are you sure this is okay?" She was reassured by her Lou, who reminded her that they were married after all. Some 11 months later, the nuptial bed had become a delivery table. After yet another mighty push, Mother turned her perspiring face to the doctor and said, "Dokter, ga ik barsten?" "Doctor, am I going to burst?" I can testify that her husband's power of persuasion and her stomach's stubborn resiliency worked in my favor. On Easter Sunday, April 9, 1939, Marian Anderson sang Schubert's Ave Maria from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial before an audience of 75,000. Hers was a historic homage to the Mother of Christ. About the same time, in the bedroom of a new farmhouse in the Dutch province of Drenthe, a new mother murmured Brahms' Wiegenlied to an audience of 1, her 4-day-old son. Hers was an anxious mother's attempt to pacify an infant mewling and puking in his mother's arms. I was that infant, born on Wednesday, April 5, the same day that the Dutch government opened Kamp Westerbork for Jewish refugees from Germany and Holland. 13 months later, the Nazis took over not only the camp, but my country. The world was one of innocence and loving arms. My world was that of innocence and loving arms. That of my father, and the world at large, one of looming evil and of arms that destroyed rather than embraced. Dad was an army recruit enrolled in the School of War, studying maneuvers and learning how to kill enemy soldiers. A month after my first birthday, his education was put to the test. The Germans suddenly invaded. They turned out to be harsh, merciless teachers. After a mere 4 days of testing against impossible demands, Dad and his cohorts, frightened and flummoxed, threw down their rifles. POWs for 3 days, the defeated flunkies were sent home to tend to farm and family. Although he did study war no more, Dad learned how to become an expert at helping the Dutch resistance fighters. He transformed his barn and acreage into a maze of tunnels and trapdoors and hideouts where onderduikers, young men in hiding from Germans, could rendezvous and make plans for sabotage and confiscation. When the war ended, he joined the POD, whose job it was to round up citizen collaborators. I grew up in blissful ignorance of the drama unfolding in my country, my neighborhood, and in my very home. The deprivations brought by enemy occupation, the fear of discovery by hostile visitors, the atmosphere of distrust among neighbors, I was too young to care. While my years on earth could still be counted on the fingers of my mother's one hand, I did not feel deprived of chocolate, did not miss the taste of an orange, had no hankering for a stick of juicy fruit. For me, those delicacies did not exist until well after my debut as a first-grade student in our town's two-room school, and ration coupons were being phased out. Before my formal schooling began, I was an inadvertent student of adult emotions. I learned that when men in helmets and long green coats stomped into our barn, my parents grew tense. And when one of them with shiny medals on his chest camped out in my parents' bedroom for a few days, resentment and anxiety fouled the air in our cozy kitchen. But I could not feel my parents' stabs of fear because I did not know that while the Germans slept upstairs, the resistance fighters hiding in our barn were planning criminal acts on behalf of sequestered Jews and resistance fighters short on rifles and ammunition. I got inklings of funny business afoot when I overheard my father tell my mother that Herman, riding a stolen bicycle, had been shot and killed that night. And when my uncle Lewa came out of hiding and showed up one evening with a bloody bandage around his hand. And when my father, always alert to approaching soldiers, suddenly ran outside one morning to toss a shiny new bicycle into the canal, the bicycle having been filched the night before by one of the boys hiding in the barn. And when without notice a woman and her daughter came to live with us, my mother's explanation about some distant aunt seemed reasonable. The girl, Visha, was old enough to be my playmate, but we kept her to ourselves. She seemed wary, and besides, she had the audacity to keep her eyes open when Dad said his preprandial prayers. Visha and her mother had been returned to their country, Holland, by the Germans near the end of the war because they had no more use for foreigners. Visha and her mother had escaped, thinking that the Germans were the place to join, the people to join. I did not have many playmates during the dark years of the war. I was too young for school, and neighbors were removed by acres of farmland, too far away to visit without a bicycle. Then there was the matter of the NSB. The NSB are traders, collaborators with the Germans. The political party of Dutch fascists, swelling to some 100,000 after the war broke out. Their presence made people cautious, even paranoid. One never knew for sure about the farmer down the road, and folks betraying neighbors was not unheard of. Best to stay home. Our nearest neighbors, the Smunts, or the Smants, were not farmers. Their place was not acres removed, but only separated from our home by Dad's large garden. And our homes, in turn, were separated from the road by one of Holland's myriad canals. 6 people lived in the Smunt home. I remember the father as a tall man coming home in the evening from work on an old bicycle, slouched wearily over the handlebars, his gaunt face dark in the shadow of his pulled-down cap. I never heard him speak. Frau Smunt, in contrast, was full of words. She hid the discomfiture of belly fat behind a dirty apron, the embarrassment of naked feet in scuffed wooden shoes. Her main challenge in life was opening and closing a pair of sluice gates and the adjoining drawbridge. The bleep of a horn from a boat loaded with peat or sugar beets brought her running. Klasha, the oldest daughter, swept our house, made the beds, and pumped the water at our kitchen sink. Jantje, a younger girl, was said to be not right in the head. She never left the house. Albert, the only son, worked for my dad on the farm. The Smunt home, set amidst a tangle of unruly brush and a canopy of twisted trees, was small and gloomy. I recall being inside it only once. Windows without curtains, corners blunted by clutter. On the kitchen table, dirty dishes in disarray. I needed fresh air and headed for the door. Before I made good my escape, the not right in the head daughter reached for scissors and cut the tip off my navy beret. Then there was Dickie. Like Visha, she was a few years older than me. Unlike Visha, Dickie and I played together, but not openly, since my mother, a city girl of good upbringing, did not approve of what the Smunts stood for. Mom's was a life of clean living, of hats and fur coats, of going to church and resting on the Sabbath. She had become the wife of an educated farmer who was an elder in our church. The Smunts were low class, poor, ill-bred. And then she could not be sure that they hadn't secretly thrown in their lot with Hitler. One just couldn't be too cautious. But Dickie and I played together. She taught me things. I watched her squat under a shrub one day and spray the ground before her with a stream of yellow liquid which steamed in the cold morning air. I had never before witnessed such a feat, at once fascinating and perplexing. On another day, she introduced me to the game of playing doctor. Her general examination of me may have been short on competence, but it was thorough, with an emphasis on matters urological. Calm down. My mother's suspicions of the Smunt's low social standing were confirmed that evening when she undressed me for bed. She was not used to finding my genitalia wrapped in a handkerchief, much less a dirty one. The next morning, she berated Dickie for indecency and banned me from alliance with the enemy. But Dickie had become my femme fatale, and I was trapped. Within a week of my mother's solemn warning to stay away from that dirty girl, I found myself once more in that dirty girl's company. Her next proposal was more of an exercise than a game, and it involved money. She became conspiratorial, and in hushed tones explained that the hated Germans were likely to come to our homes and run off with our piggy banks. But she assured me she was onto their game and had a game of her own, one which called for secrecy and stealth. Parental involvement was not part of the plan, she cautioned. I hurried home, propelled by dread of the German threat, and withdrew my savings. I don't recall how many coins I had saved up in my little metal box with the slit on the lid, but I'm pretty sure my contribution to the pot was a lot larger than Dickie's. Driven by the threat of parental opprobrium, I ran back to my clever benefactress. Dickie had dug a hole, a gaping repository, a safe haven during those uncertain times, safe from the nasty Germans, but not safe from Dickie's clever scheme. I never saw my precious coins again. 50 years later, I visited Dickie and her husband. They sold honey out of their home in the village. Her mother's sluice gates had long ago been dismantled. No boats with bleeping horns plied the now stagnant canal. She reminded me of her mother, dumpy, plain, simple. Hard to believe she once peed in my presence, fondled my privates, stole my money. She did not recognize me, of course. I would not have recognized her, and even then saw no trace of a semblance to my playmate of old. I bought a jar of honey. We spoke in the dialect of Drentse country folk. I poked about in the far recesses of her memory for references to our common past. Gradually, her face, at first quizzical and confused, began to change. A faint smile of recognition, an eye gleam of recollection. Yes, she remembered H Otttens. She did not, or would not, recall the shenanigans I hinted at. We had our photo taken. I shook her hand and wished her and her bees well. All right. A quote from John Bailey in his diary of private prayer. And so at the end of my earthly life draws ever nearer, bind my heart to the holy interests of that unseen world, so that I may not grow to be a part of these fleeting earthly surroundings, but instead grow more and more ready for the life of the world to come. Advancing age comes with unwanted baggage which arrives without fanfare or warning and becomes incrementally more burdensome. The rheumy eyes, the aching shoulder, the stiff neck, the hyperactive bladder, the failing memory, wrinkled skin with its roadmap of blemishes. But there are benefits as well. The lady with a heaping cart pointing to the space in front of her at the grocery checkout line. The pimple teen locating your car in a crowded parking lot. An occasional genuine request for an opinion. Young ladies with unbeguiling smiles. Senior discounts at Panera and good deals for ARP members. And a cane and a limp qualify you for a wheelchair at the airport, thus avoiding the hassles of waiting in line. More important even are the permutations of the soul. A propensity to weep at the cadence of a Bach cantata or the warble of a perched wren. We pay closer attention to little things, become more patient, less bored. The reality of dust to dust is reinforced each time we come home from yet another funeral of someone in our graduating class. The thought of imminent demise rearranges our priorities, less concern about the here and now, more about the meeting with the Maker. A little less attention to oneself and a bit more interest in others' well-being. Less self-reliance, more anticipation of the Spirit's leading, more awareness of the tension in the Christian life, the antithesis, as our forebears used to call it. The worn-out jargon of prayer takes on new meaning, and old familiar hymns are sung with newfound conviction. We discover that reasonable requests made in faith are granted after all, usually in surprising and delightful ways. We gain an increased appreciation for the writings of Christian authors, including the ancients of the Old Testament. We become less inclined to nitpicking and fault-finding and more likely to surrender to God's grace. Jesus prays. I don't know about you, but I struggle with this complex combination of divinity and humanity in a single entity. So I sometimes fantasize a little bit, maybe irreverently, but here goes. Jesus goes up to the mountain to pray. Why does the Son of God need to pray? Oh, Father, it's been a tough day down here in the valley with all those hungry people, hungry for my teaching and hungry for my bread and fishes. I am bone weary, but I need to talk to you, my Father. There are still things about the mission you've sent me that I don't fully understand. Yes, my dear mother and Joseph too have been patient with me whenever I ask them to tell me more about how I was born and their understanding of my mission here in the land of Israel. As I grew up, I somehow began to see things more clearly. Suddenly the lights would go on, which convinced me that I was special, that, believe it or not, I am actually your son. But I am so weary, and my feet hurt, and my back aches, and my brain is tired too. It needs a break from trying to figure out just how to go about doing my Father's business. Words I used to excuse my inconsiderate behavior when my desperate parents came looking for me in the temple so many years ago. And though I sense your guiding each time I'm surrounded by the clamoring masses with all their diseases and distresses, I so easily become aware of the limitations put on me by my muscles and organs and nerves and skin, which make up the human part of my being. And then I wonder, how am I ever going to get through the day? And now my boys are on their way across the lake in their little boat. I wonder how they could have left without me. They probably figured that someone who could multiply a few loaves to feed thousands would find a way to get home. But they keep having trouble squaring my humanity with my divinity, and they are perplexed and confused. Father, the irony is that I too have moments when I seem to see through a veil darkly. Why do I, the Son of God, as both my parents and you have assured me I am, have to undergo periods of depression or suffer from fevers and indigestion or feel the bitter tears of grief when a friend dies? Why do I, your beloved Son, have to share in humanity's hardships, the fallout from the fall? And I still haven't quite gotten over my frightful encounter with the devil the last time I spent time with you in the wilderness. Did you allow him to tempt me? If so, was that ordeal really necessary? So here I am, dear Father, standing in the need of prayer. Give me strength for my demanding assignment, healing lepers, sighting the blind, raising the dead, delivering the demon-possessed. Comfort me when I try to comfort the mourning. Preserve my humility when crowds cheer my appearance, when my enemies melt away at my words. Keep me from feeling sorry for myself when I have no pillow on which to rest my weary head, when my feet burns from blisters after an all-day walk over Jerusalem's cobblestones. And keep my anxiety at bay when premonitions of betrayal and agony of body and spirit seek their way into my conscience. Help me better understand the mysterious duality of my role here among your creatures. Give me your peace that passes understanding when I can't fully figure it all out. Father, you've heard it before, but I say it again. Your will be done. It's getting dark, and now I go to join my boys in the boat. I can see them struggling to get across that tempestuous lake. I'll make the most of a teaching opportunity. I'll remind them of the divine part of my being by walking on the stormy water. I'll walk right on by them to learn their reaction. Then I'll still the storm. And finally, when we're all in the boat, including that impetuous Peter, my favorite disciple, and all is calm, I'll try to tell them why taking time, a lot of time to pray, is an indispensable part of living a life of obedience to you, my dear Father in heaven. I'll explain that even I, your very own son, can't get along without regularly talking to you. And when at last we reach the opposite shore and pull the boat onto the sand and the light of dawn gives promise of a new day, all 13 of us will be able to face the challenges of the day ahead. Sound teaching, compassionate healing, patience under criticism, and forgiving evil gestures and deeds against us. Thank you, Father, for filling me with courage, clearing away a bit more of the ambiguity of my mission, reminding me of your assurance last year during that magical moment at the River Jordan that I am your beloved Son in whom you are well pleased. Amen. Amen. And here a bit more conjecture about the wonderful man and God, Jesus. There's a startling component to the familiar story in Luke's narrative of Jesus and his love when he describes a scene on the shore of the Lake of Gennesaret. Jesus sees a couple of boats and some fishermen washing their nets. Because a large crowd is pressing him, he asks the men to row him offshore a bit so he can address the eager audience. His sermon over, he tells Simon, whose boat had been his pulpit, to row out and try his luck at fishing. Against his better judgment, Simon, who's caught nothing all night, follows instructions, and voila, his luck changes in spades. It's a miracle. His net becomes filled to overflowing with fish which had eluded him all night. That's good news indeed, more than what the fisherman could have hoped for. But he has no time to wonder at it all. With blessings come problems which call for immediate attention. His net starts to break under the weight of the madly swarming fish. And to make matters worse, his boat is threatening to go to the bottom. He has breaking and sinking to deal with. Are his blessings about to become curses? One wonders how Jesus is taking this in. He's in the sinking boat after all. Is he thinking that perhaps he's gone a little overboard with his largesse? Is he still unsure of how to balance his humanity with his divinity? Or is he, by mixing blessings with alarm, teaching the fishermen and all who read of their adventure ever after an important life lesson? What kind of blessing is it that causes breaking and sinking? Maybe breaking and sinking were nothing more than a dramatic way to illustrate just how great the catch of fish was and the magnitude of the miracle and the amazing superhuman power invested in the Son of Man. The catch of fish was not an answer to prayer, after all. At least we're not told whether the weary disciples raised heaven's directed pleas during that unproductive night. I don't know what to make of it. I can't shake off the incongruity of what's happening to the Galilean fishermen who, after a humdrum night of casting and recasting their nets, have become the recipients of a blessing so immense that their nets tear and their boat is about to sink. A blessing which threatens to ruin them. What kind of blessing is that? We're not told how or even whether they managed to save the catch and the boat. Maybe they did, or maybe they didn't. What matters, I suppose, is that Jesus got both their attention and their fealty. After Jesus had finished his mission on earth, he once more advised his disciples to cast a net after they had caught nothing all night. That's in John 21. Again, a miraculous catch, but this time the net did not break. Could it be that because of what Jesus had accomplished, we no longer have to worry about breaking and sinking? God our Savior wants all people to be saved. He slowly lifted his head at the sound of a distant shout. From his lofty perch on the hill called Golgotha, the man on the cross could make out a mob heading his way. He was not surprised because a rough-hewn beam next to a newly dug hole a few yards away portended yet one more crucifixion on this, the day before Passover. He pushed himself up to get a better look. He saw a brandishing of spears, heard the dissonance of anger. He watched as a wooden beam was taken off the back of one man and placed on another, pulled from the crowd. Prodded by a soldier's whip, he slowly dragged it toward the hill. The crowd seemed more intent on disparaging the just relieved man who seemed to have been beaten considerably and who had all he could do to stay on his feet. The sound of shouting and jeering got louder as the mob began making its way up the hill, its bedlam heavy on the sultry air. He looked over at his companion, bound to a cross a stone's throw away. Earlier this morning, both had been escorted to this hill, tied to Roman crosses and hung up to die for their crimes. Their ascent went unnoticed, accompanied only by their executioners. Clearly, the new arrival, driven before the storm of a boisterous mob, was no ordinary criminal. He watched as the miscreant was stripped of his bloody clothes and stretched out on the cross beam, his arms secured not by ropes but by spikes driven through his wrists. He winced as the cross, stood on end by the soldiers, thudded into the gaping hole. It struck him as odd that the man seemed at peace, had very little to say, and when he did speak, the noisy mob became quiet. The soldiers paused in their routine. In measured voice, he spoke of forgiveness, a ring of authority emphasizing his words. It dawned on him that this beaten, bedraggled man must be the notorious rabbi, the one they called Jesus, who had caused so much controversy and trouble in Jerusalem and beyond. It seems his enemies had gotten the best of him at last. So that's what all the hullabaloo these past couple of days before Passover was all about. The Sanhedrin had caught him out at last, and now he hung on this hill between two fellow criminals. He heard the guy on the left of Jesus voicing his frustration and challenging the miracle worker to get the three of them off their crosses. He had heard about this crucified Jesus, how he had cured folks and driven out demons. He had even caught a little of what the man had said to the crowds from the top of a hill across the lake. Why, he had even eaten some bread from the leftover chunks his disciples had gathered up after he had fed them. He couldn't understand how this miracle man could end up on a cross. He berated his crucified companion and told him to shut up. He heaved at his restraints, tried to make sense of what was transpiring on this hellish hill. This Jesus was behaving in a way that puzzled him. Why was he not raging at the injustice foisted on him? He had heard him speak of a God in heaven, had called him his Father. Why did his divine Father not get his Son off the cross? He had heard rumors that this Jesus had forgiven bad behavior. A hated toll collector up in a tree, a whore who cried tears on his feet, a woman about to be stoned for adultery. Perhaps, he thought, he too could be forgiven. But was it too late? Had his crimes been too heinous? Something stirred deep within him. Tears flowed down his cheeks, which he could not wipe away. A lump rose in his throat, which he could not swallow down. He felt despair dissolve in courage. He turned to the man of sorrows and blurted out, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." His words surprised him. Life after death? A waiting kingdom? Prospects from which prospects which seemed ridiculously out of place on this horrid hill under this broiling sun with ropes chafing his aching arms. But the words had tumbled out and he held his breath. He turned his head and his eyes met those of the suffering man. "Today," he heard him say in a voice of confidence and promise, "today you shall be with me in paradise." He heard the words, but it took the rest of his ordeal that afternoon to fully understand that his future had become secure and lovely. As the day wore on, the man in the middle spoke more words, and with each word he felt his misgivings dissolve and his confidence bolstered. And then it suddenly got dark and cold. When the sun finally reappeared, the man they called Jesus, the man who had welcomed him home, spoke his last words and took his last breath. As his head dropped, so did the noise from the few remaining bystanders at his feet. The silence gave way to the ringing words of the centurion. Surely he was the Son of God. By the time a trio of soldiers trudged up the hill, the scorching sun had begun to set. The stinging flies had left him alone at last. His pain-racked body had become numb, but his mind remained keen with anticipation and wonder. A soldier clubbed his legs. Another stuck a spear into the side of the man whom he would soon meet in paradise. His questions and doubts had given way to assurance. As he hung dying, he knew for a fact that the man in the middle had saved his life. Okay. I have to fuss around a bit because I didn't know how long it would take. I'm only given 3 hours, so I have to be careful of the time. Okay, I'm going to read a story about our visit to the Nieuwe Kerk in Amsterdam. You're excused. I know you have work to do. The Nieuwe Kerk in Amsterdam. Did I ever say, why have you not built me a house of cedar? And that's from 1 Samuel 7, verse 7. We climb an expanse of broad stone steps and enter the church through a massive doorway. We are met by an eager young man with a brass name tag on his blue uniform. He recites the obvious. Worship services are out and exhibitions are in. Ropes on posts guide us to a desk in the apse where we pay 13 euros each for admission. It's the only way these days to visit this landmark of Christianity. Pay money to go to church. We join the tourists who've come to admire a photography exhibit. The Nieuwe Kerk is not new and no longer a church. It has been witness to centuries of goings-on on Amsterdam's famous Dam or Dam Square and host to millions of Christ's followers. It has withstood the ravages of fires and survived the ire of indignant iconoclasts. But it could not ward off the gathering winds of late 20th century secularism. Sermons and homilies, songs and chants, candles and incense had been the staples of the cavernous Gothic building for times immemorial. For centuries, the pious had kept Sabbath standing shoulder to shoulder under its vaulted ceilings amidst its massive columns. Today, the historic building is a grand exhibition venue. Tithes go not for doing good works, but to buying screens and projectors. Instead of domines giving homilies from ancient pulpits, dignitaries make speeches to television cameras. Once Bach and Buxtehude brought tears to humble penitents. Now their recitals elicit applause from elite audiences, from Soli Deo Gloria to keyboard virtuosity. To pay the bills, a cafe sells mocha lattes, and a museum shop offers postcards and cute replicas of the grand old church. I study the photos on the screens, read the narratives They portray human suffering from today's global conflicts. I don't know what it is that distracts me and wonder if others feel it too. Perhaps it's the faint rustlings from the vaulted space, echoes of sacred word and suppliant song, the intangible sense of ancient history of bygone years. Whatever it is, I leave the troubled world of the photographer's cameras and wander into one of mystery and nostalgia. I walk on a floor of gray grave slabs, polished smooth by centuries of unshod feet, clogs, sandals, and shoes. The long shuffle has all but rubbed away the dates and names engraved on them in quaint Dutch, markers of death and sorrow. I stroke the dark burnished wood of a pulpit with sounding board and sit on a bench with a back as upright as the choristers who once sang from it. If walls could sing, Gregorian chants and Praetorian psalms would fill the musty air, but their sounds won't be heard till the dead beneath my feet rise up on the last day. Am I alone in the line of tourists to have wandered off into the dark recesses of the ancient building? Does no one else see the irony in this place, appreciate the history of the church-turned-exhibition hall? Does anyone wonder how it was that 6 long centuries of piety could change overnight into secular humanism at best? Am I mourning the passing of worship and dedication that once loomed large in the lives of common folk? Or am I grieving over the mock piety and self-aggrandizement which drove royalty and papacy to outdo each other in monument building? I see this grand church as a symbol of both pious dedication and ego-building foolishness. Through stained glass windows, ambient light outlines the shadowed ceiling, far beyond which, we're told, sits God on his heavenly throne. When his triumphant son rejoined him, the God of Israel vacated the Ark of the Covenant in Solomon's temple. Since then, he's had no need for basilicas and cathedrals and a grand church on Dam Square, but is eager to drop in for a visit wherever folks gather for worship. Perhaps it's to the good, after all, that the new Akirk has become a home for music and the arts, a grand promoter of justice and intolerance. One more story. All right, let's see if I can find it. Yes, there it is. Okay, this is a story in a lighter vein. Ribs and remembrance. I'm glad this is not our first date, she said, after licking her fingers over a plate of clean-picked ribs, her lips smudged with barbecue sauce. We were celebrating our anniversary. When was the last time we went on a date, I asked. Is this a date? She dropped the last rib on her plate, wiped her lips on a napkin, and rinsed her mouth with a swig of Chenin Blanc. We stopped dating when we got married, she said. When the kids came, we didn't even go out anymore. The kids had long ago begun their own dating exercises, gotten married, and left us a couple again. We were at liberty to go out without arranging for babysitters or worrying about teenagers getting into curfew trouble. Do we just go out, or are we dating again? I wondered aloud. She looked at me. Do you remember our first date? She asked. Not really, but I know your lipstick was perfect and you wore a tight sweater. Sharon, are you here? She smiled. You're bluffing. I made no impression on you. That's not true. I remember admiring your black nylons. Besides, we discovered each other on the choir tour bus to Denver, right? So sitting in the same seat was our first date. She pushed her plate away and drank more wine. I'm glad the bus driver didn't serve us barbecued ribs, she said. After more dates and a year of separation, when she went to Nigeria to teach at a boys' secondary school, we got married. We still dated, I suppose, but the pressure of making a good impression was lifted. Little by little, our true selves began to show. We realized that we hadn't really known each other. Remember that time I got so upset I drove to my parents' home to cool off, I asked? She nodded. You surprised me with your immaturity. She had a point. My dating behavior belied my real self. I had much to learn, and she tried hard to smooth my rough edges. I couldn't handle the criticism, I admitted, so I took it out on you. She looked away and sighed. Yes, there were times when I wondered why we hadn't gone on more dates before getting married. Our knees touched under the table, and she smiled at me. I smiled back. Because you were hot, I said. In time, we got the hang of it. She learned to be patient with the other's deficiencies, to ignore annoying noises, to respect times of privacy. Her patience was more sorely tested by far than mine, and I lost mine a lot quicker. Why did she always load the dishwasher from the front? Why could she not catch on to shifting her bike gears? Why were her sneezes super loud? Why didn't she throw out those rarely worn clothes from her bulging closet? Do you remember when I asked you if your dad ever made your mother a cup of coffee, she said, and you were pretty sure you hadn't? Or he hadn't? I never forgot that question. It opened my eyes to the patriarchal society in which I had grown up. And now I get cappuccino in bed every morning, she said. You've come a long way. I had to agree. Yeah, but it makes one, I make one for myself too, I said. And I love the way you clean up after meals, she went on. Maybe that's because I don't want you to stop cooking for me, I grinned. Okay, I've come a long way, thanks to her patient character molding. Rudeness, sarcasm, and aloofness gradually made way for kindness, attentiveness, and empathy. I always replace the toilet paper roll and make sure it's on the over position. But some bad habits linger and will likely never go away. I still spit, forget stuff, get impatient, use bad words. My OCD tendency gets in the way at times. I seldom squeeze the toothpaste tube from the bottom. I'm blessed with a wife who's okay with that. She's either given up or finally gotten used to my gaffes. She merely says, I heard that, at the sound of a subdued fart. She doesn't even look up from her Sudoku when I noisily clear my throat. She interrupted my reverie. What are you thinking about? You haven't said a word. I noticed the ribs lying helter-skelter on her plate. Mine were lined up like matches in a matchbook. Our server stopped by, poured water in our glasses. The ice cubes chimed softly against the sides. About how you've tamed me and how we've learned to put up with each other, I said, and how we get along so well. We got to choose a dessert yet, she said. I pushed back my chair, crossed my legs, and looked across the table at my wife of 50 years. You're all the dessert I need, I told her. She scoffed. You know, BSing is one habit you refuse to give up. But tonight I kind of like it. I got to let you go. I could read for a long time. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your being here. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have if you stop by. There's only one word, that this book is available at the Bookman downtown, in case you want to read more about my remarkable life. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Reflections at 80.